Hello and welcome to this evening's competition. This is our first nature competition of the 2021-2022 year. Before we get started with the competition, though, I do have a few announcements that I'd like to make. Upcoming competitions on August 6th, we will be doing our first photojournalism night. And again, photojournalism has special rules, so make sure you look at the website and follow the instructions for photojournalism. August 13th, we have our first creative and pictorial competition. The deadline for submissions for that is August 4th. Some upcoming speakers on July 30th, we have a members only Zoom session with Michael Chinichi, and his topic will be evoking emotion. So again, you can look on the website and get some more details on Michael's presentation. Upcoming field trips. We do have a field trip scheduled for August 21st to the Madison Seminary. Unfortunately, that's sold out right now, but they are maintaining a waiting list. So if you have some interest in that, you might contact them and see if somebody cancels, you might be able to get in there. Other items of interest, not official field trips, but there are several rodeo things going on this summer. July 24th and August 21st, Buchan, Ohio, which is south of Lodi. And it's a good opportunity to get out and take some action shots at a rodeo. The other thing we want to point out is that enrollment for fall classes has started. Uh, Classes begin September 1st, and we are offering all four classes right now. Wednesdays will be fundamentals of photography, Saturdays will be Photoshop editing, Mondays, intermediate Photoshop, and Tuesdays will be Lightroom. And again, we invite you to go to the website and kind of look up details on all of those classes. We ask you, if you're going to sign up as soon as possible so we can get you the materials that you're going to need. We're planning to do live classes at that point and also do some broadcasts. So we'll see how that goes. Uh, we invite you to watch this and all Friday evening meetings at your convenience at our CPS YouTube channel. There's a link on the CPS website homepage, or you can just go to youtube.com and search for Cleve Photographic. And again, we invite you to subscribe to our channel and choose to be notified whenever new videos are posted. So again, welcome. This is our first nature competition for the 2021-2022 year. Tonight we have 132 images, 82 in the nature category, and 50 in the pictorial category. And we are going to comment on all of the pictorial images tonight, and only the nature images where people asked for comments. So here are our judges for the evening. Okay, our first judge is Tom Crocher. Tom Croce, excuse me. He's originally from the Cleveland area. He runs a fine arts photography business in southwestern Ohio. He's got a BEd degree from Miami University of Fine Art in 1984, a Master of Architecture degree from Washington University in St. Louis in 1987. He's been a freelance photographer with more than 30 years of experience. He's had work published by National Geographic, Landscape Photography Magazine, and NANPA Expressions 2016, a publication of the North American Nature Photographers Association top 250 images. And Tom has judged for us in the past. Our second judge is Bill Helsel. He majored in architecture in college, and that led to a freelance career with an emphasis on architecture and travel stock photography. He has retired from shooting assignments, still teaches photography in an adult education program. He's currently concentrating on his personal fine artwork, which has been exhibited in several locations in the San Francisco Bay Area. While his color work is digital, he still shoots most of his black and white work on film and makes his own prints in a wet darkroom. About 20 years ago, he began shooting landscapes with black and white infrared film and fell in love with its creative possibilities and is still shooting with it today. You can see examples of his work along with an introduction to black and white, infrared, film, and digital at www.billhelsel.com. And again, Bill has judged for us in the past. A new judge is Bob Rottenberg, MD. He has an interest in photography, has had an interest in photography since age 13 when he received a Kodak Hawkeye camera. He retired from being a radiologist 20 years ago, moved to Santa Barbara, and joined the Channel City Camera Club. Since then, his interest in photography has grown into a passion. He has served 3 terms as president of his camera club and won numerous awards with the club, including several images of the year. He's particularly interested in travel and nature photography, often working with his daughter-in-law, who is a food and travel writer. He has provided images for several newspaper pieces on travel in California and Alaska. Bob says, I have a passion for learning the history of photography so I can put my own images and those that I judge in the context of what others have done. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to judge your competition, whose rules and scoring system are remarkably similar to those of my own camera club. And as I said, Bob, this is the first time judging for Bob. The judging criteria for the competitions, each judge will score an image on a scale of 5 to 9. The final score for each image is the total of all 3 judges' scores. Images are judged on 3 criteria: impact, composition, and technique. So with that, let's get started with our nature images. Oh, yes, these will be no comment images. Okay, so we will leave them up there and let me read the names. This is American Goldfinch by Joseph Miko, 21 points. The second image is At a Snail's Pace by Sarah Zietlow, 21 points. This image is called Avalanche Gourd, Glacier National Park by Susan Mahorchik, 19 points. Baby Raccoon by Elda Baroni, 18 points. Bald Eagle in the Breeze by Lori Zorns, 21 points. Black Eyed Susan by Vicky Wirt, 24 points, second place. Blue Heron by Rich Foley, 21 points. Browns Parks, Green River, Colorado by Gary Marich, 18 points. Chipmunk by Dave Saborik, 22 points, honorable mention. Color's Edge by Craig Cotellis, 18 points. Craig Buck, Craig, Colorado by Gary Marich, 18 points. Dancing in the Water by Serena Cernick, 21 points. Daylily by Marge Brady, 22 points, honorable mention. Disciplining the Kid by Bill Keaton, 22 points, honorable mention. Egret by Jim Rowe, 20 points. Evening Patrol by Gary Wood, 22 points, honorable mention. Eye to Eye by Roger Summer, 24 points, second place. Feathers Blowing in the Wind by Darla Zajac, 24 points, second place. Fern Unfurling by Vicky Wirt, 24 points, second place. Flamingo at Rest by Richard Ader, 22 points, honorable mention. Floating Flower by Rich Foley, 17 points. Golden Rod B by Rick Carroll, 21 points. Got Caught by Serena Cernick, 18 points. Great Blue Heron by Mike Kopkas, 21 points. Lake Josephine Glacier National Park by Susan Mahorchik, 22 points, honorable mention. Len's Baby Dahlia by Kathy Amari, 23 points, third place. Looking Up in Antelope Canyon by Susan Bestel, 22 points, honorable mention. Lover's Quarrel by Cynthia Smith, 23 points, third place. Magnificent Magnolia by Darla Zajac, 19 points. Male Cardinal by Richard Schneider, 22 points, honorable mention. Melting Glacial 1 by Maria Diaconu, 18 points. Mudridge Park in the Fall by Jen Cockrell, 15 points. Ocean Sunrise by Jackie Sieski, 21 points. Pine Cones Uncovered by Fran Marino, 18 points. Purple Hosta Blooms by Fran Marino, 20 points. Ready to Hop by Mike Kopkas, 22 points, honorable mention. Red Pole by Dave Saborik, 24 points, second place. Reflections in a Spring Pool by Craig Catullus, 23 points, third place. Rising Solar Eclipse by Jackie Sieski, 22 points, honorable mention. Romantic Gesture by Debbie Leesky, 24 points, second place. Spaghetti Seaweed by Jane Sidney, 22 points, honorable mention. Spent Clematis After a Rain by Sarah Zietlow, 22 points, honorable mention. Sunset East Glacier by Bob Kowaleski, 23 points, third place. Take Me to Your Leader by Rick Carroll, 24 points, second place. The Peacock by Joe Destefano, 21 points. Time for Breakfast by Joseph Miko, 20 points. Tree Swallow Hanging Out by Ron Werman, 18 points. Trumpeter by Megan Rowe, 17 points. Untamed Waters by Bill Keaton, 21 points. Unwelcome Guest by Donna Schneider, 25 points, first place. Up Close and Personal by Bonnie Luxo, 21 points. Watercolors by Belinda Prince, 20 points. We Are Hungry, Mom. Donna Schneider, 25 points, first place. Whale's Throat Pleats by Bonnie Luxo, 24 points, second place. White Lily by Eric Weddington, 20 points. Wild Columbine by Marge Brady, 21 points. Wonderland by Elizabeth Klanick, 18 points. Wood Duck by Keith Marchand, 23 points, third place. Young Wings by Dennis Bean, 20 points. Now, the rest of these nature images will be commented on.
Tom C. says the color is beautiful and the exposure looks great. I know with wildlife you get what you get, but would like to see its body, something like a 3/4 view, or if that wing in front was behind the bird so we could see body.
Blue Heron Reflection by Roger Summer, 25 points, first place.
This image combines 3 layers of visual elements: trees, rocks, and clouds, which is a good approach in landscapes. It could be improved by waiting for more interesting or dramatic light on the rock and fine tuning the way the trees overlap the rock shapes, especially the lone pine tree on the right. Including a bit more of the left side trees with the wider framing could make them more effective as a foreground frame, says Bill.
Bright Arches by Maria Diaconu, 18 points.
The idea of using an out of focus background to give context to the focus foreground is a good one, Bob says. I wish the foreground element was more compellingly interesting. I think the composition could be improved by a lower camera angle to eliminate the mid-ground greenery and isolate the stump against the cliffs. I would experiment with depth of field to see if having the background either in sharper focus or more blurred would help.
The image is called Desert Sentinel by Elizabeth Klanick, 16 points.
Tom says, what a great moment. It really tells the story. I might try to open the shadows a bit on the chick's head and try to bring down the highlights on the chick in the background and on the water. I might have tried to move a bit to the left to try to show more of the face of the drop off. It would have given us a sense of height and added to the drama of the moment.
Don't Be a Chicken by Leslie Nutt, 19 points.
Bill says the insect adds a nice punch line or center of interest to the shot. Also, there's a nice hint of a diagonal line from the lower left to upper right, and the dark background really make the flowers pop. Possibly the composition could be strengthened by showing more of the yellow center of the bloom in the lower left. That would perhaps make the diagonal stronger and provide more of a supporting cast, the main flower.
Double Vision by Jane Sidney, 20 points.
Bob says the Bluebird is nicely isolated against a neutral background and the pose is jaunty. I wish there were a bit of color in the background to harmonize with the colors of the bird. I would move the bird off dead center to improve the composition. The very strong specular highlight in the eye is a bit unnatural. It looks like a strobe. There is a great deal of image noise in the background. This is a shot that needs to be tack sharp, and it is.
Eastern Bluebird by Ben Collins, 23 points, third place.
Tom says it's a very nice shot of the egret. The lighting is nice, but it looks like there's an area of a few blown highlights, and I would try to open the shadows on its head and beak. It also looks like the white balance may have been off. There's a blue cast in the shadows on the bird.
Egret by Megan Rowe, 21 points.
Tom says, this image has a nice abstract quality, with several diagonal bands of different tones and colors, and the maple leaves make a colorful accent. The frozen turbulent water and small dead leaves create a fine texture that is almost uniform across the entire image. I would be interested to see what the scene would look like with a longer exposure to blur and smooth out the water, thereby creating a more contrast between the water and leaves.
The image is called Fall Colors, Waterfall by Donald Penn, 17 points.
I like the concept of the strong leading lines at the lip of the iris, Bob says. I would like to see a tighter crop as the bright tones and colors of the lateral petals take my eyes away from the center of interest. This would also add just a bit of mystery. I would prefer to have the entire center of interest in focus. This might require some focus stacking.
Golden Eagle by Kathy Amari, 20 points.
Tom says excuse me. I like what I think you are trying to do, an abstract of the color, shapes, textures, and the light during the fall. I think backing out a bit so we see the red leaves against the background would have made it a bit more abstract. Or the other option would have been to get it in much tighter on one leaf or a small group against the color and texture of the background.
The image is called Leaves Within Forest by Donald Penn, 19 points.
Sorry, we're on fall colors.
And Lilies.
Sorry, folks. Bill says this image has a strong center of interest with good use of the second bloom as a supporting cast, and the dark background makes the flowers pop out nicely. However, the two flowers would probably work even better if they overlapped less, allowing their individual shapes to show up better. Also, a small counterclockwise rotation of the camera would reshape the blooms into a diagonal, more interesting than the horizontal shape uh, they are they form now. Finally, using a bit more of the leaves as part of the composition might add some depth and meaning to this image.
Lilies by Eric Weddington, 21 points.
Bob says the pose and positioning of the eagle in the frame works. The image is underexposed and practically all detail in the feathers of the body are lost. The number of branches surrounding the eagle are distracting. The image has a distinct bluish purplish color cast, which should be easily corrected by clicking the neutral eyedropper on the branches, which should be gray. This should be easily done in virtually all post processing programs.
The image is called McGee Marsh Bald Eagle by Dan Hennessy, 18 points.
Tom says it's a very nice long exposure of this stream. It looks like it might not have used, he might not have used the polarizing filter. It would help take the gloss off the rocks and the log as well as deepen the colors. I might try a little burning of the group of trees in the upper left and right.
The image is called McDonald Creek by Bob Kowaleski, 21 points.
Bill says, here's a great moment cut with excellent light, sharpness, and nice blurred background. Perhaps a darker background would make the feathered friend pop out even better. And seeing a little more neck with a vertical composition of might add to the comedy of this image. Still, it's excellent and it stands.
The image is called Ostrich Scream by Richard Ader, 23 points, third place.
Bob says the image is well exposed and tack sharp. The rim lighting is effective. The branch in the lower right corner is a major distraction. I would like to see a landscape crop with the entire wolf included, or alternatively, a tighter crop to make this more of a portrait. Add a bit of vignetting would be helpful to draw the eye to the wolf's head and neck. It would also accentuate the rim lighting.
The image is called Parma Coyote by Cynthia Smith, 22 points, honorable mention.
Tom says, beautiful image. I love the backlit wings. I might try to open the shadow areas on the bird's head and body. We lose its legs in the dark background. I also would burn in all the spectacular highlights around the edges of the frame.
The image is called Roseate Spoonbill by Keith Marchand, 22 points, honorable mention.
Bill says, image combines strong shapes organized on a diagonal with a fine feeling of interaction and enough information via the cactus at the bloom to tell you something about where you are. The strong shape of the bird on the left is weakened a bit by its beak overlapping the dead branch, and that's a minor complaint. However, I think cropping off some of the distracting sky at the top would definitely strengthen this composition.
The image is called Seeing Eye to Eye by Richard Schneider, 24 points, second place.
The colors are lovely and the focus perfect, Bob says. The soft out of focus background echoes the colors of the main subject beautifully. I like that the image shows the fully open blooms as well as the buds. The crop on the bottom is a bit tight, and I'd like to see a bit more of the leaves below the blooms. The dead center placement of the subject in the horizontal frame does not work for me. I would suggest either a square crop, which would emphasize the symmetry of the composition, or a looser crop with the subject off center.
The image is called Silver Beacon Flowers by Ron Werman, 22 points, honorable mention.
Tom says, I love the feel of this image. A wonderful foggy morning on the lake. I think it would try to back out. I think I would try to back out a bit and show more of the lake and the trees. The birds for me are just a small part of the image. They definitely make it more interesting, but for me, they are not the main subject.
The image is called Solitude by Debbie Leesky, 22 points, honorable mention.
Bill says, this is fine, simple image with lovely subdued but harmonious colors, which allows the bird to show up beautifully. I might be bothered by not seeing the legs and feet, but actually the blurred grass seems to say something about the location of the birds and the bird's habits.
The image is called Song of the Meadowlark by Lori Zorns, 24 points, second place.
Bob says the fast shutter speed captures the moment very well and the focus is spot on. I would keep the highlights where they are, but lift the shadows and exposure just a bit, especially around the head and neck, which is where the action is. The crop is a bit too tight. For me, it would be wonderful to see more of the reflection of the heron to include the mirror image of the head, neck, and splash, as well as a trailing splash behind the feet.
The image is called Strike by Gary Wood, 23 points, third place.
Tom says this is a nice shot of the eagle. It's well exposed and there's plenty of detail in the feathers. The background is a bit complicated, which take away from the bird. Might have tried to move to a different spot and get a better angle on the bird with better background. Might have also backed away a bit so that the upward angle is not so steep. Sometimes getting close is not the best option. We can include more content and can lessen the effect of looking up at the bird.
The image is called The Sentry by Dennis Bean, 20 points.
Phil says, I find this image intriguing because of the well placed focus with shallow depth of field, the leaf like quality of the bird's radiating feathers, and the overall feeling of camouflage. The way the bird nest and surrounding merge. The diagonal framing branches help give an image a feeling of organization and structure. But since the main subject is dead center, I wonder if the composition would be stronger if the bird was, say, a little to the left of center.
The image is called The Yellow Crowned Heron on the Nest by Jim Rowe, 21 points. And that concludes the nature part of our competition. Now we will move on to the pictorial images. And we will be commenting on all of the pictorial. Bill, is that correct? All right. Yep.
Bob says this is a haunting image of what looks like a jail. It is sharp from back to front. The leading lines in the bars draws the eye into the frame and accentuate the receding perspective. The bright highlights of the windows play well against the somber shadows. The two splashes of bright yellow light work very well. I might try lifting the shadows just a little bit so the entrance to the cells are a little more obvious. I would also crop off the partially seen window in the lower right of the frame. Having a bright object in the corner draws the eye away a bit, but this is a minor quibble.
The image is called Third Floor Suites by Robert Boyle, 23 points, third place.
Tom says, I love the light and shadows on the rolling hills. I might try to bring down the exposure a bit and up the saturation a little. I might try to crop the bottom 1/3 to really emphasize the light and shadow on the hills.
The image is called A Walk in Tuscany by Susan Bestel, 21 points.
Phil says, the black and white infrared rendition helps transform the decaying building and clouds into something elegant and surreal. There's no center of interest, but I don't think that's a drawback, as the eye can wander throughout the image, finding interesting shapes, lines, and textures to enjoy.
The image is called Abandoned Row House in Infrared by Glenn Petranek, 24 points, second place.
The emerging blooms of what looks like an apaganthus, sorry if I got that wrong, make for an interesting subject, Bob says, and the sharp hanging droplets and the diagonal orientation of the stem adds to the dynamism of the composition. I might have tried shooting this as a vertical and include more of the stem. I think the purples would be accentuated by bringing the exposure down a little and darkening the greens. The background is beautifully out of focus, but I think the second stem detracts from the composition.
The image is called Allium with Droplets by Ron Werman, 21 points.
Tom says the light is very nice and even. The exposure looks great, and both the doe and fawn are sharp. I wish there was some interaction between the two or some moment that helped tell more of a compelling story.
The image is called Backyard View by Maria Diaconu, 22 points.
This image is well lit and composed with a fine tonal quality, says Bill. I'm drawn into what the workman is doing with his feet and tools, but his hands and face seemed otherwise engaged, as though someone just interrupted his work, and this, for me, weakens the image a bit.
The image is called Basket Weaver by Richard Ader, 22 points.
Bob says, assuming this is not a composite, I have to praise the photographer for her lightning reaction to a fast moving subject. Truly amazing. I love the roof lines and how they frame the fighter. In the best of all worlds, the plane would be more centered in the patch of sky. I think the image would be even more successful if there were just a bit of color or detail in the sky. I can very faintly see a cloud. I hope in post that this could be brought out by darkening the sky and adding a bit of contrast. A hint of blue could be added without making it look like a fake, but I wouldn't do anything that detracts from the authenticity of the image.
The image is called Blue Angels Rock Cleveland by Roger Summer, 20 points.
Tom says, great timing. I love how this shows how far they can reach with the neck. The bird is in focus and sharp. My feeling is that you went too far with the processing. There are blown highlights on the bird's head and tail, and the high contrast in the background takes away from the bird. I know it can be difficult with animals, but I like to have more room in the frame in front than behind them, and it gives a sense that there is a place for them to move to rather than running into the edge of the frame.
The image is called Blue Heron by Rick Mills, 21 points.
Bill says, here's an elegant, symmetrical, one point perspective view with perfectly corrected vertical lines, which would normally draw the eye to the distant windows and wood panels. However, the exaggerated contrast and color saturation both hold the eye in a very red foreground and flatten the image, weakening its feeling of depth. I see this as an attempt to do something novel with a much photographed subject, but feels it ends up creating a conflict between subject and the photographer's treatment of it.
The image is called Church in Italy by Joe Destefano, 19 points.
The diagonal orientation of the two blooms is what makes this image work. Focus, exposure, and focus fall off are all well handled. I think a tight square crop would be effective as the diagonal arrangement would be accentuated by having one bloom top left and the other bottom right. The distractions in the background have been minimized by darkening in post. I wish that background were even more out of focus. The stamens are a crucial element in this image and in most floral images. I would try to accentuate them with a different black and white conversion.
The image is called Crocus in Black and White by Laurie Zorns, 24 points, second place.
Tom states, what a great moment. It's well exposed and both birds are sharp. I love the perspective of being at eye level. We get to see them from a perspective that we typically don't get. I would open up the shadows a bit on the birds, maybe bring down the highlights a bit, and adjust the white balance to remove the blue cast.
The image is called Feeding Time by Cynthia Smith, 23 points, third place.
Bill says, this is a very interesting abstract. Uh, Seems to combine a rigid architectural quality, repeating straight lines and rectangles, with a certain amount of fluidity, curving lines, and strong diagonal. After trying without success to figure out what exactly this image depicts, I left. Let me try that again. I'm left with asking, Where does the eye go in this image? And is it pleasant to look at? Or maybe what feeling do I get from it? My conclusion is that it leaves me a little cold.
The image is called Golden Bank by Debbie Leesky, 24 points, second place.
Quite frankly, Bob says, I am not sure what the photographer is trying to tell me in this image. My eyes are a crucifix created from a chain link fence. The barbed wire adds to the message, as does the dead vegetable matter, but there is just not enough visual information for me to fill out the story. I wish there were more information in the vertical element. The shadows are blocked up and the highlights blown out. I suspect this is a very personal image for photographer, but it just doesn't resonate with me.
The image is called Judgment Day by Elizabeth Klenick, 19 points.
Tom states this is a wonderful image. The use of depth of field is outstanding. The light reflect the light reflecting on the face on the back of the keys lets you know where the focal point is, while the light is reflecting on top of the white keys gives an almost fluid feel. The, the repetitive patterns work great. One nitpick is I might burn the bright area on the surface of the keys in the upper left corner of the frame.
The image is called Keys by Leslie Nutt, 23 points, third place.
Phil says, this dark mood image seems to emphasize the water since that's the brightest thing in the photo. But I suspect the rusting bridge and aging stonework are the intended main subjects. The dull light suggests decay, but if that's not the photographer's intent, different lighting that more clearly reveals the shape of the bridge, such as sunlight from behind, would probably be an improvement.
The image is called Lock 29 by Rick Mills, 19 points.
Bob says this is a lovely bucolic scene. The fall colors are vibrant and the image is well composed. The somewhat cinematic crop enhances the composition. The light is somewhat flat, which enhances the colors, but does not add any drama or interest to the scene. I can imagine this being even more interesting and beautiful in the early morning light or late day. For me, the drab overcast sky is a negative. The photographer did the most one could do under the circumstances. A low raking light would add some shadows and texture, which would add more visual interest.
The image is called On the Road to Dolly Sod by Richard Schneider, 23 points, third place.
Tom states this image is nicely exposed. He did a great job on making the DR look very natural. I'm just not sure what the author is trying to express and what the subject is. Is it the phone or the light? I would pick one and have tried to create the narrative around it. For example, taking the phone off the hook and letting it hang would have created a whole bunch of questions and would have engaged the viewer.
The image is called Phone Booth and Chandelier by Glenn Petranek, 23 points, third place.
Phil says, this nicely composed landscape makes good use of layers of ridges, warm, cool color contrast, and the backlit foreground trees that separate well from its background. It feels as though a lot of the highlight and shadow adjustments, or maybe HDR, was used to hold the detail in all parts of the image. I'd love to see what this composition would look like with the sun a little higher in the sky, less blocked by the clouds, lighting the composition, lighting the, oh man, lighting the tops of the trees, ridges, and lights the foreground tree more strongly. I just realized that. I apologize. You might want to consider cropping off the lightest leaves at the bottom of 1/8 or so of the frame. That might strengthen the sunset as center of interest.
The image is entitled Shenandoah by Gary Wood, 20 points.
Bob says this is a charming portrait of what I assume is a tree sloth. The expression is cheerful. He appears to be smiling for the camera. The depth of field is very shallow, resulting in a loss of sharpness on the right eye and loss of texture in parts of the fur and mouth. The face is well placed in the frame, but I wish the crop was just a bit looser so that the foot and claws were included since they are a part of the story telling of this creature.
The image is entitled Sloth by Keith Marchand, 22 points.
Tom states, I really like the feel of this image and the composition works very well. I might try to bring the highlights down a bit and adjust the white balance to warm it up.
The image is called Solitude by Leslie Nutt, 26 points, almost a perfect score, first place.
Bill says generally, one flower's still lives work better with something else included as a support cast. Fortunately, this image has that in the form of an additional bloom or blooms, grass bowl, glass bowl, and fallen petals. I think brightening the bowl and fallen petals a bit would make it even more effective and maybe relieve the intensity of the black background somewhat.
The image is called Spring Cutting by Dennis Bean, 22 points.
Bob says this is a creative and unusual still life, which seems to me all to be about curves. The old, what I assume is a hose and a leaf, are very nice, and the red and green colors play off one another successfully. The light is very two dimensional, and there is a hot spot center left where the curves converge. I would have liked it even more if the background plank had a bit more texture and did not look so freshly painted, so that it would be visually be more in keeping with the dominant element, which I think is the hose. The long horizontal crop enhances the rhythm of the curves. Creating an image out of what appears to be found objects is a wonderful exercise.
The image is called Swirl by Jane Sidney, 23 points, third place.
Tom states, what a cool experience to see these hawks together like this. The exposure looks right on. First hawk looks a little soft. I think you need more depth of field. I might try to bring down the luminance of the background to help get more separation between the birds and the background. After I took this shot, I would have tried to move a few feet to the right and simply move the background. And simplify the background.
The image is called Three Beats, One of a Kind by Belinda Prince, 22 points.
Osprey, egret, and crow. What a great combination. I think this photographer is very lucky, very patient, or both. The image is nicely organized on a diagonal, and there's some quirky emotion content in that while the crow and egret seem to be ignoring each other, the osprey is regarding them with suspicion, probably because it has a fish and the other two don't. Moving the tiny sliver of white in the lower left corner would subtly strengthen this image.
The image is called Three on the Food Chain by Jim Rowe, 22 points.
This is a successful flower portrait of a pansy, Bob says. The high key treatment suits the personality of the flower. The out of focus repetition of the similarly colored pansies in the background is great. Flower portraits frequently need this shallow depth of field treatment. I have two suggestions that I think would really make this image sing. A slightly smaller stop would improve the focus of the star of the show. It would ensure that the subtle textures of the flowers are captured and hopefully also put the bottom petal and stem more in focus. The bottom of the flower is a little soft. I would very slightly darken the pansy to help separate it a bit more from the exquisite background. It would also add some subtle shading to the subject and give a bit more dimension. I emphasize slight darkening as the bright tones are very essential to this image.
The image is called Viola by Kathy Amari, 22 points.
Tom C. says, I love any image at any time you can get animals interacting. The exposure and the composition are very nicely done. I do think the downward angle you shot this from doesn't really help much. I think if you were at eye level with the birds, it would have made the image more dynamic.
The image is called What by Bob Kowaleski, 23 points, third place.
Phil says this is a solid documentary image that makes good use of the colorful reflections in the water and renders the tall buildings perfectly vertical. This kind of shot usually works better when there is a bit of color left in the sky, avoiding all the dead black. Um, but if you're going to shoot it with a black sky, I'd suggest framing it lower to show less sky and more reflection, reframing enough to avoid cutting the shot in half with the horizon line of the grassy banks below the building. Then straighten the building in post processing if they need it.
The image is called A Cleveland Postcard by Belinda Prince, 20 points.
A well seen photograph, Bob says. I personally love this kind of minimalist image, which seems so simple, but which is so hard to pull off successfully. The subtle tones and colors of the sky and clouds are very well done. Any more saturation would easily overwhelm the beauty. I would try cropping just a bit off the bottom so that the light and airy feeling of the grass was enhanced, and try cropping the left side of the frame so that the clouds are a slightly more important visual. Three is a magic number in composition, and finding three clouds is just perfect.
The image is called A Massive Storm Blowing In by Sarah Whalen, 19 points.
Tom states this is a nice idea using the arched opening to frame a scene that can be very dynamic. You have to make the decision about whether you want to stand outside the arch and shoot the entry or shoot from inside and let the dark edges emphasize the framing. Bright area of the tunnel on the left is not really working for you. It takes away from the landscape that's in the distance. As far as the landscape part of the image, I might try to crop out as much of the bright area on the left and most of the road, almost to where the shadow ends.
The image is called Archway to Breisach, Germany by Bonnie Luxo, 20 points.
Phil says this photo is strangely appealing because of its unlikely feeling combination of lush green grass and dry, arid landforms. The panoramic format with the very little sky emphasizes this quality. Has no clear center of interest, but the eye wanders freely and finds lots of interesting detail, especially in the upper right.
The image is called Badlands Vista by Sarah Zietlow, 21 points.
Bob says this is a very beautiful blue hour seascape. The warm tones of the light work so well with the blue tones of everything else. Small aperture has produced a nice starburst effect and ensures that everything is in focus. There is interest in foreground, midground, and background. It looks to me like the shutter has been dragged just a bit, which beautifully softens the water just enough. The crop is perfect. The only thing I might try is adding just a hint of magenta where the sky meets the water on the right. Quite frankly, this might just be gilding the lily.
The image is called Battery Point Lighthouse by Donna Schneider, 24 points, second place.
Tom says these guys are so charismatic, and I think you did a nice job expressing it in this image. squirrel looks a little soft. I'm not sure if it's a shutter speed or a focus problem. The shutter speed should be, depending on the lens, anywhere from 1/600th to 1/1000th of a second. I would have also positioned the squirrel much lower in the frame to eliminate the bright grass in the foreground.
The image is called Chipmunk Quietly Snacking by Darla Zajac, 20 points.
Phil says, in this photo, the gulls add a lot of interest to the sky, along with a massive spray. The choice of time of day allows the lighthouse beacon to show up nicely. Because the lighthouse and adjoining building are slightly tilted to the right, the impression is that the wave is knocking them over. If that's not what's happening, this shot would be improved by rotating it counterclockwise to straighten the structure. Um, straighten the structure. The dark breakwater allows more spray to show up dramatically, but makes the odd barrier to seeing the bases of the buildings. Was there any other possible vantage point that would eliminate that problem?
The image is called Crash Goes the Wave by Serena Cernick, 21 points.
Bob says a combination of flowing water and icicles capture a very specific moment nicely. The shutter speed is just long enough to give the water a silky feel. I would brighten the image a bit to bring up the tones in the waterfall. A simple adjustment to open up the shadows a little so that they don't completely go block in large areas, and some brightening of the highlights a little to add some sparkle would improve the tonality. The composition feels cramped. I would like to see a little more of what is going on the right side of the frame. It looks like there are some nice green moss on the rocks, which would balance the dark tones, and the waterfall looks a little bit crowded. I would also suggest adding a bit to the bottom of the frame so the waterfall does not seem to end so abruptly.
The image is called Crystal Falls by Craig Catellis, 20 points.
Tom states the exposure on this image is very good. He did a nice job of exposing for the shadows without blowing the highlights, although I do think you could open up the shadows on the deer a bit more. It looks like you tried to apply a blur to the background, but didn't feather it enough. It's unfortunate that the sharpest part of the deer appears to be its butt, which is also where the light is falling off, really emphasizing that area. I like the perspective and think you could crop the bottom, the where, the I guess it's to where the first yellow flowers begin. Just a suggestion, but rather than trying to artificially blur the background, I might try a vignette.
The image is called Deer in Aspen Grove by Gary Marich, 20 points.
Phil says, this is an ice covered submarine propelled by an eagle flapping its wings. That was a question. Okay, probably just a moment well cut and nicely composed. Including a little more of the reflection below the iceberg might have added a bit of more depth and interest to this image.
The image is called Eagle on Ice by Bill Keaton, 22 points.
Bob says this reminds me a bit of an Elliott Porter landscape image. The bright yellow colors of the last leaves of autumn is very beautiful. The composition and crop work. I feel like the other elements have been excessively darkened in post and to give the image an unnatural feel. The brightly colored twig looks like it is floating in space, not anchored to anything. And the way the yellow is reflected in the log looks overdone. I like this as an image that could be less, have been more.
The image is called First Light by Rick Carroll, 22 points.
Tom states, I think this is well lit, and you did a nice job softening the shadows, but keeping a lot of texture in the fur. I might brighten the eyes a bit, I also like that there is an engagement and connection with her. I might have tried to position her so so, so the line with the background is much lower in the frame and not bisecting her, or tried a seamless background. I also would have positioned her farther to the right in the frame so there's more space in front of her than behind.
The image is called Ginger by Joseph Miko, 21 points.
Bill says, this is a fine example of lighting and posing, creating a lovely, nostalgic mood. Two suggestions. The woman seems to be looking at the bowl, but not actually doing anything with it. Perhaps her hands could be placed to suggest some actual activity related to the bowl. The shelf in the lower left is brightly lit enough that it competes for our attention with the more important parts of the scene. Perhaps darken it a bit.
The image is called Lost in Her Memories, 26 points by Jackie Sieski, 26 points. Again, almost a perfect score. First place.
A charming, winsome expression on a beautiful pet, Bob says. I realize that black background animal portraits are very much in vogue these days, but it just doesn't work for this subject. It gives the light, which should be soft and gentle for the subject, a harsh, unnatural look, and the pillow or whatever the dog is leaning against has been cut off, giving the whole right side a very unnatural feel. The sharp, textureless right side of the dog looks like it has been cut off in Photoshop. Where is the left ear, the left neck, and the chest? My guess is the original unmanipulated image was a more successful portrait since the charm of the dog is obvious. Many of the most successful black background portraits leave a bit of a halo of light around the subject so they don't look like they are floating in space.
The image is called Luca, the Little Italian Puppy by Fran Marino, 21 points.
This is a beautiful scene, Tom says. I think the framing works well. A couple of things I might change are the lower portion of the frame, as it's too dark. It doesn't match the luminance of the sky, and the abrupt transition between dark and light doesn't look natural to me. I would also bring up the luminance level of the reflection of the mountains to more closely match the level of the area of the reflection of the far left.
The image is called Many Glacier Hotel, Glacier National Park by Susan Mahorchik, 22 points.
This is a nice, sharp, well lit, and tightly framed bird portrait. It would gain some drama and with a darker background, and probably be more interesting if it included more of the bird and or some relevant surrounding elements to complete the composition.
The image is called Masked Lapwing by Marge Brady, 24 points, second place.
Nice to see monarch butterflies, Bob says, and these are beautifully captured. They are all tack sharp and the light is perfect. The arrangement of the butterflies on the branch is pleasing, showing multiple different aspects of them. The complementary color scheme makes the monarchs really pop. The diagonal of the branch adds visual interest. The only thing I might suggest is darkening the lightest tones in the background and decreasing the contrast in the background to give it an even softer, out of focus feel.
The image is called Migrating Monarchs by Susan Bestel, 21 points.
Tom states, I really like the repetitive pattern and the perspective convergence of all the stones. It makes for a very impactful image. I think it would be even more impactful if you were to crop out everything except the headstone. There are a couple there are a couple of ways to accomplish this. To crop the image, you have the opportunity to reshoot it at the same point. You may need to find a location that doesn't show the edge of the area, making it easier to fill the frame. I might have tried to rotate the camera to the left, which might accomplish the same thing, also eliminate the line created by converging headstones that really doesn't lead anywhere.
The image is called Ohio Western Reserve National Cemetery by Jen Cockrell, 19 points.
Bill says this is generally well composed shot with good lighting, but to me the water and rocks at the bottom feel a bit crowded. Including a bit more of them would likely give this image a better sense of completeness. Also, the unnaturally high contrast feels somewhat in conflict with the subject. Finally, the pale tree branch poking in from the left side of the image is a bit distracting, so I'd suggest darkening it a little.
The image is called Old Mill by Rich Foley, 20 points.
The antique typewriter and old specs make for a very charming and very successful still life, Bob says. The lighting, especially on the eyeglasses, is very nice. It is a bit softer than the slightly more specular light on the typewriter. I might try brightening the lower front of the typewriter so that the print is just a bit more legible. There's a very slight cast shadow in front of the eyeglasses case, which adds dimension. There is a heavy vignette around the whole image, which I think could be lightened a bit so that the texture of the wall and desk would come through a little more. Although it might detract from the drama of the photo, I might try adding a third element to the composition. An old pen or pencil, a small notepad or book might help fill in the story. But all in all, bravo for a very enchanting image.
The image is called Oliver Batwing number 9 by Vicky Wirt, 24 points, second place.
Tom states, this is very nicely exposed and very sharp with lots of detail, and the color is wonderful. You have done a great job isolating it from the background. I like the way it is framed, although I might have framed it a bit lower, so there is a little more room at the top than on the bottom. I also might try bringing down the luminance on the leaves. Overall, it's very nice.
The image is called Queen Anne's Lace by Dave Saborik, 22 points.
Bill says this is a wild and weird, somewhat ghostly image that pulls the eye immediately to the center windows, which seem to be trying to form a jack o' lantern face. It is perhaps weakened a bit by the large areas of nearly uniform shapeless foliage. Since it appears to have been shot in cloudy light, no hard shadows, I'm wondering what direct sunlight would do for this scene.
The image is called Roxford Avenue in Infrared by Glenn Petranik, 23 points, third place.
Bob says the strong point of this image is the lighthouse and the leading lines of the metal structures, drawing our eye to the lighthouse itself. For me, the people detract from the interest of the scene. They are randomly distributed, and none are doing anything interesting enough to draw my attention. I would adjust the dynamic range so that the image as a whole was a brighter, and the whites in the clouds were brighter, and there was more detail in the shadow areas. I would warm up the color balance as the whole image has a distinct blue color cast. Finally, I would do some dodging of the lighthouse, lightening the bright side to bring out the red color and to increase the directionality of the light.
The image is called South Haven Pier by Rick Mills, 20 points.
Tom states, I think the simplicity of this image works well. The lighting is beautiful, great use of depth of field to isolate the subject, and the way you position the text is very well done. I might try bringing down the luminance a bit on the top of the frame and the upper left corner.
The image is called Using My Noodle by Mike Kopkas, 22 points. And that concludes our competition tonight. Victoria, we want to thank all of our judges, and I'd like to thank our readers as well. Bill Keaton, Dan Lester, and Dan Sandy, who filled in and read the comments from our judges. And again, thanks to all who entered. We invite you to send your feedback to us at info@clevelandphoto.org and let us know things we can do to do better or how we did, basically. And then finally, that concludes tonight's event. If you want more information about competing or you'd like to join the Cleveland Photographic Society, please visit our website, www.clevelandphoto.org, and look at the tabs there to find out about competitions and also membership. So thank you, everyone, for your patience, and we will talk to you soon. Stay safe.